So please join me in welcoming to the podium Mr. Jim Wolfston.
Thanks, Linda.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. I consider it a great honor to be here. I attended yesterday, learned all sorts of interesting ideas, had some great conversations, and I also appreciated the comments that Ben and his predecessor, I'm sorry I don't know your first name, that you made, the comments you made about service and the quotation from the Declaration of Independence. And what I'm going to talk about today is a pathway, a proposed, as we might say, an algorithm for moving forward and scaling, as Wenda Fong has urged us to do, and Millie has urged us to do, to scale. And we have a great opportunity to do this because there's a huge geopolitical shift that's underway. And it's a geopolitical shift. We inherit a status, if you will, in higher education that comes from solving the great geopolitical crisis that the United States had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which was the competition with the Soviet Union. It was a competition of capitalism versus communism. And when we saw Sputnik flying across the sky, all of a sudden it became very, very important for us to energize and empower our great university system to do research. And so consequently, now that we've solved that problem, we inherit the idea that the Research One universities are the most important universities in our system. And they are indeed very important. Research is very, very important. I'm a person of a scientific background, so I certainly believe that, and I have attended a Research One university for my master's degree in computer science. However, there is a change happening in our system where the newest problem, the biggest problem that we face, the biggest geopolitical problem that we face is economic divergence. The shipping of, according to the RAND study, of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of our population to the top 1%. Now, CSU is an engine for social mobility. And social mobility, a lot of people are trying to digest this idea and redefine it and so on. It's pretty straightforward. It's a term from economics. Basically, it means either you have absolute mobility, which means you make in real dollar terms, inflation adjusted, more money than your folks. Okay? That's a good thing to do. But what really counts in making a society balanced is what's called relative mobility, which is if I make more money than my folks, am I in the same quintile? No, if I can move up. That's what matters. That's called relative mobility. So this is a term that's been well established, well defined by economists. So what we have here is an opportunity to actually change the hierarchy in higher education. What is honored in our society in higher education? I think we have a sense that what should be honored is what's happening here at CSU, at this system. Well, how is this just a regional university? How are these just regional universities and the best in the West and this type of thing? No, this may very well be the greatest institution in the world, precisely because it is addressing the number one geopolitical problem of our time, a problem that's different than what we faced in competition with the Soviet Union. What we face now is a potential rending inside this country owing to economic divergence. So what I'm proposing is an algorithm. I call it the San Marcos Triangle. Not to arrogate some kind of endorsement from CSU San Marcos, no way, because they don't really know what I'm going to say quite yet, okay? But it contains three components. It's a challenge to the higher ed ethos, it's a challenge to the campus ethos, and the new technologies of opportunity. I believe very strongly that if this algorithm plays out at CSU, will it play out at SUNY, will it play out at CUNY, or some other school I don't know about? If it plays out at one of those schools, that school will emerge as the most prestigious in the next generation. Because that school will be honored for the fact that it solved the number one geopolitical problem of our time, which is economic divergence. That's the potential here. And you're doing the good work. You've done the good work. You've set the basis. You have a sense that it's about elevating people, about transforming lives of individuals. You have a sense of that. I know it's all in your heart. And you have the techniques and capabilities, but there's more that we can do. So I believe that this is an important event. This is a very important event. I've had the opportunity to track with Ellen Neufeld and Karen Barber since 2018 when there's a little conference room table, and she had the first social mobility conference. It was a little affair, and Bob Morse was invited. Very cleverly, Ellen and Karen brought in the man who actually defines the hierarchy for our higher education system, Bob Morse, chief data strategist at U.S. News and World Report. Brought him in to see, hey, maybe there's something you should be considering about what we do here, which is to elevate the lives of people, regardless of their economic background. And he took it to heart. I met Bob and I talked with him. He's an avuncular guy, very nice man, well-intentioned, but he serves his master, and his master is all about basically defining the value system for our higher education in the United States of America. And he gets away with it. That's got to change. And so right now he's struggling. He's struggling because he had a parallel track for social mobility and then the real best rankings over here, and now he's integrated the two and created a firestorm. That's very interesting. I'll talk about it. But I want to say why I called this the San Marcos Triangle, why I'm calling this proposed algorithm the San Marcos Triangle. It's because when great events happen in our world, they're named after the places. The Camp David Accords, peace between Israel and Egypt at the time. The Bretton Woods Accords that put in the monetary system, they're named after the places. Why not do the same thing here? And also, importantly, well, the namesake for this city is St. Mark the Evangelist, all right? What did he say? Well, how's his gospel different than the other three gospels? It is because it's a call to action. It's a call to action. That's what's different. So that's why I call it the San Marcos Triangle, to give homage to this thinker. Now, here's the problem. This is a RAND study. This is not Jim Wolfston. This is a RAND study. The top 1% of Americans have taken 50, not billion, trillion dollars from the bottom 90% of our population. How has this happened? This has happened since the 70s. This has happened, what they did was what's called a counterfactual, which is leave the taxing regimen the same as it was in the 70s, map that forward, and see what happens. What happens is a $50 trillion pocketbook from our pocketbooks over to the 1%. That's what's happened. That's a real problem. And I'll tell you why it's a real problem. Because the number one correlator to the rioters at the January 6th insurrection, according to the University of Chicago, was the people who were arrested, they come from counties where the white population is being replaced. Okay? That's the number one problem for these people. Okay, so anyway, here's the problem. The American dream. Here's the aphorism. If you want to find the American dream, you want to chase the American dream, go to Denmark. The United States is now at the bottom of developed nations in terms of social mobility. Social mobility, again, being defined as the fluctuations and potential for people to move up from the quintile of their parents. And it's not just Ray Dalio, Stephen Hawking. One of the great insights that he had, this great genius, said that we can't go on ignoring inequality. We have to address this problem. And the reason we have to address this problem is from a Stanford historian, Walter Scheidel, who tells us, if you survey history, it doesn't end well, okay? It doesn't end well when economic divergence occurs. Again and again and again, the only cure is uprising, revolution, war. We can't afford that in a nuclear age. We can't afford it. So we have to figure out a soft landing, and CSU has a potential to allow the university, or to allow our university system to create a soft landing for economic divergence in this great nation. That's the potential that we hold here. Now, that doesn't mean just because we have the potential that the potential is 50-50 or 80-20. I think it's actually pretty small. But I don't care. I do a whole bunch of things in life that have low probabilities of success, and just go for it anyway. So I'm not necessarily an optimist about the outcome for the United States of America when you look at what's happening right now in the political sphere. But it's really clear what the problem is. It's this foundation of economic divergence. The key is education. And particularly in this complicated world, higher education. The skills of critical thought, the skills of analysis, the skills of speaking, the skills of writing. These things are essential in this much more complicated, fast-changing age. But here's the problem. The previous speaker spoke about justice. We have a problem. Education ought to be a force for leveling out, a counterweight to income and wealth inequality, but it's not. It's celebrated. It's a perpetuation of privilege is what it primarily is in this country. And we're getting away with it so far because we have these false levelers in this scale of justice. We have free porn. We have liberalized marijuana laws. Even though the main artery across your forebrain, which is the last part of the brain to develop, it develops up through age 26, gets constrained so that you feel, what me worry, dude? Because it's responsible for planning and worry. It's the forebrain, right? But that's okay because it helps mollify the public to keep this balance from breaking, okay? We need to move education out of that tray over to the other side. That's what we need to do. And we can. So, but what we have to do is we have to compete. We have to compete with the ethos of higher education, which is fundamentally wealthism. If you look at even the newly doctored version of the U.S. News and World Report, which includes this, we throw in a little social mobility bone there, it still is the fact that the correlation between the top U.S. News so-called best institutions is with those who serve the wealthiest part of our population. Enough. But we have the defenders. He's not here to debate with me. That's okay, but he's gone public. This is a chancellor at Vanderbilt University who says that, wait a minute, you're mashing in social mobility. It's just not fair to us. So we've dropped from number 9 to number 13. This is a crisis. This just can't be. He's got a real problem. He says that measures of outcomes and affordability are deeply flawed. Okay, in what way, scholar? Tell me how they're deeply flawed. But he thinks traditional measures like test scores, they're not supposedly flawed. Let's face it, if I'm expert on anything, it's with respect to the allocation of space. We have 1,000 universities that use our scheduling systems, including this one. We understand that the size of a classroom is not an impediment to learning unless, of course, you're in the primary era, in the primary ages. That's when small classrooms are very important. But there's no proof in the literature that says at the tertiary level we need to have small classrooms, except Bob Morse says you do. And so that costs a lot of money and infrastructure building and so on for people to compete like Vanderbilt has, to mollify the mothers and fathers who have rich kids at prep schools with small classes, and they can have the same comfort at Vanderbilt, you see. It's not true. It doesn't correlate to educational outcomes. So, but he's happy. He's the benefactor, the richest man at the time, railroad baron, Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's happy to defend the wealth system. That's good. Now, I want to talk about a little history here as to why we got into the stage we are, where wealthism dominates our view of what's good in higher education. And it started with the Vietnam protests. Vietnam protests, there were two problems. We had this thing called the draft. There was a potential, no matter how powerful you were in society, that your son or daughter could get killed in Vietnam. That was no good. And so the campuses went into tumult. And so they cured that because they basically have created a mercenary force which draws from the underclass, the poorest people in our country, to elevate them. And you go fight our wars, and then the rich people, our children, are now safe. That's what we did. That's part of the solution. But the other part of the solution was hectoring. Spiro T. Agnew, who basically should have gone to jail but didn't for some other miscreant behavior that he did. But he went out on the stump and said, nattering nabobs of negativism, effete intellectual snobs. So culturally, he got people riled up about all these campus protests that created Earth Day, by the way, and actually caused us to reconsider what happens in a capitalist system. Is it really right that we should have a capitalist system? Could there be some reform? Could there be some change? Are we willing to be open-minded to the possibility there might be something that we could learn from socialists or communists or other forms of government? Any of that had to be quashed. It had to be quashed to protect the elites at the time. And Spiro Agnew was at the forefront. Finally, the nail in the coffin, the Friedman Doctrine from the University of Chicago. Milton Friedman said the sole purpose of a corporation is to enrich the shareholders. Enough of this mamby-pamby social stuff. You shouldn't have that if you're a real, rigorous businessman. And that's, of course, what exists today, primarily at the Epicenter, University of Chicago Business School, and throughout our business teachings. We generally, it's tough. It's time to get tough. It's time to it's time to have rigor. It's not this other distracting stuff. It's about enriching the shareholders. Well, and this also makes this benefactor very happy. He was the richest man at the time. He was the founder of the University of Chicago. And the University of Chicago, here's something interesting now. Wait a minute. University of Chicago is a corporation. Okay? Corporation, right? And by the way, a whole bunch of universities are run by corporations. You ever hear of the Harvard Corporation? And the CSU is, San Marcos is run by a corporation. Okay? Wait a minute, these are corporations. Business, the sole purpose of a business is to enrich the shareholders? Now, guess what? Here's the trick. A corporation is a person because of the lobbying efforts of all the plutocrats. The corporation is now considered under the law a person. A lot of us think that this happened in 2010 with Citizens United, but in fact, it's been a slow-moving evolution of corporation to person, culminating most recently with Hobby Lobby, to give corporations religious expression rights, okay? You don't have to bake a cake for that gay couple. No way. You're a corporation. You have religious expression rights. You have First Amendment rights in Citizens United, but you have all these other rights, contractual rights as well. So, if a corporation is a person, wait a minute, Wilton, you got a problem, pal. Your purpose, your sole purpose, which is to enrich a shareholder, conflicts with the preamble of our Constitution. His statement is un-American. It's un-American. Because this, we the people, and people, corporations are people, we're formed to establish justice, to protect, to ensure domestic tranquility, to promote the general welfare. That's what a person is entrusted to do in this nation. So don't tell me you're a person, but you get to have all the responsibility, all the rights, but none of the responsibilities. But yet that's the ethos. That's the ethos that prevails in our business schools and elsewhere. So, what I propose is the San Marcos Triangle, higher ed reform. Now, when you're going to reform something, when you're going to change something, when you have an algorithm, you got to be willing to go to first principles. You got to be willing to question basic assumptions. Whenever you see a problem, I learned this as a computer scientist. None of the sacred assumptions that I had when I needed to make that scheduling algorithm correct could survive if there was a bug. I had to question everything. And so one of my intellectual heroes is Sextus Empiricus, which is the founder, Greek founder of skepticism. We think skepticism is doubting. No, skepticism is the idea that knowledge with a capital K doesn't exist, okay? You have to question every assumption. So what's what we're going to do here? One of them is the myth of selectivity, okay? And what's happened is that we even here yesterday, people were talking about the selective schools, right? We should not acquiesce in terms of the language of selectivity anymore. We should stop doing it because it's a false conflation. It conflates the idea that if you're selective, you're somehow more scholarly, and I'll show you this. Selective basically means you're popular, you're famous, you get more applications than the other guy, okay? Now, interestingly, there are many, many quote-unquote selective schools in the CSU system. CSU Cal Poly, for example, San Luis Obispo, has a selectivity rate that's higher than the University of Toronto, which is one of the greatest universities in the world, interestingly. So what are we doing talking about selectivity? All right, here's the problem. Let's think about the importance of language. Calling popular schools selective because they receive more applications speciously imputes greater values. Look at the synonyms for selective. Careful, judicious, discerning, scrupulous, okay? And that's easy step over to scholarly, because in scholarly, the synonyms are thorough, studious, detailed, cultured, cultivated, right? So when you talk about selective, XYZ school is famous and popular as being selective, you're just acquiescing to the language. This is higher education. We have an obligation to teach the public, to teach ourselves, to teach our students how to use language properly, including its implications. And this is a corrosive implication. So I'm going to show you a disproof. I like disproofs because I'm a mathematician by training. This is called the Cheesecake Factory disproof of selectivity, of the myth of selectivity. All right? Now, there's only so much you can eat. You got to eat an appetizer, you got to eat your entree, you got to have your dessert, right? Maybe your drink, right? I don't care which restaurant you go to. But if you go to the Cheesecake Factory, you have 250 choices. But if you go to the Michelin 4-star restaurant, you only have 10 choices. Okay, you get where I'm going with this? That the number of seats that you have in your school is how much food you can eat, and the number of applicants is the number of choices on the menu. So are you telling me that I'm more selective if I go to the Cheesecake Factory than if I go to the 4-star restaurant? Come on, let's grow up. Another one is the high test score myth, right? Now this is very interesting. The high test score myth is the idea that the way we should have these superstructures like ETS and College Board that test for what amounts to the dependent variable. The dependent variable, how many within 1 hour can you guess the right answer or can you discern the right answer? Now, there's nothing illegitimate about the fact that people score high on tests. And they do so quite often because they indeed have the skills that require them to solve the little math puzzle or to get the vocabulary correct. That's true. But there's a whole algorithm for guessing that I could explain to you because, again, I'm a computer scientist and I have a scheme for guessing, particularly in the area of superscoring, because, of course, if they admit you, they want your highest score so they can brag about it. Like Cornelius Vanderbilt's defender said, it's about test scores, right? But here's the problem. The fundamental problem is that what we're testing is the dependent variable on the independent variables for academic and career success. We are testing for facile knowledge. What do you know in 1 hour? And that tells a story. That's a mistake. We don't have to keep making that mistake. Because, remember Malcolm Gladwell? How many of you have you read Malcolm Gladwell, right? So remember this thing where he's talking about 10,000 hours of practice? Right? That's what it takes, right? Well, finally, the researcher whose work Malcolm purloined and misstated stood up in 2018 and said, no, folks, it's deliberate practice. And a deliberate practice has 4 components. These are the independent variables we know now from his lifetime of research are behind academic and career success. They are as follows: practice study, okay? Consistency of practice study, tracking your practice, and something called mental mapping, which is, are your thirst for creating shortcuts for how things work? What are the mnemonics that you create that allow you to master your field? What are the shortcuts that you implicitly create to allow you to master? Now, these could be anything. And they can map. If you have the willingness to practice, the willingness to do so consistently, and the ability to track your practice, and particularly if you're willing to do mental maps, that's what we should be testing for, because that's metaphoric to the skills that are required for success in academia and success in careers, especially in a fast-changing world, because this is the learning age. Things are changing faster and faster. I'll give you an example, okay? It doesn't have to be something intellectual. It could be something proprioceptive. I used to do triathlons, for example. All right, now I need to get faster swimming. That's not my background, swimming. So one of the things you do when you're doing the freestyle, right, is I thought, okay, you just lead with your thumb, okay? That's a mistake. You actually lead with your pinky, okay? And the reason you lead with your pinky is if you lead with your thumb, this movement, this rotation of your hand actually pushes, think about the body as a lever, when you push down here, it causes your feet to sink, which slows you down. So it's just an example of a mental map. Mental maps are pervasive, but your thirst for discerning these and collecting these so that you can execute with facility and agility is the key to academic and career success. We can test for this for the first time. Okay, The other is then profit. Well, we have this idea, it's okay for businesses to be profitable. It's okay because guess what? We have nonprofits. Now, interestingly, in the U.S. Economy, education generally is the same slice of the GNP as healthcare. But higher education is served by 1/10 of the vendors of healthcare. And part of this is the antipathy towards profit, okay? But we're covered because we have the nonprofits. We have these people making, at the heart of the wealth system, making all this grandiose money. Really? So if it isn't by wealth and its proxies, well, then what can we measure institutional greatness? How can we do that? Well, let's stop we've erected statues to Martin Luther King, and we have boulevards at almost every city with MLK and so on. Oh, that's great. That's our sop to the black population. Let's listen to this great genius, because he told us that the measure of a man, the true neighbor, will risk his position, his prestige, even his life for the welfare of others. God, that's beautiful. And that's what we have the chance to do. So, what we need to do is we need to develop and inspire students to deliver for their family, their society, and the future. We can't be afraid of it. We can't continue this educational enemy. Well, it doesn't matter. We just go out and make a profit. We don't care what you do. As long as you have the skills and you make the money, it's all good. No, we need to fulfill the purpose of the preamble to the Constitution that's echoed by Martin Luther King, that was inscribed in the Declaration of Independence. And so what I suggest, as part of this algorithm, what I call the San Marcos Triangle, is that the greatness of an institution is a delta on the social power that it imbues in its students. That's the difference between the skill set that I have versus my parents, the difference between the money I have, which is about economic social mobility, and whether I uphold the purpose or supersede the purposes of my family for the common good. Am I more motivated to deliver for my family, for my society, for the future? Social power is purpose, skills, and money. And we can't avoid any of those three. So, why can't we avoid the first one? Because what's the difference between social power and antisocial power? What's the difference? It's purpose, right? So you can have people who are miscreants, who have lots of skills and lots of money, who work against the good of our society. So the way we do this is the kind of work we're doing here. We take credit for the fact that this institution, CSU San Marcos, is modeling institutional greatness. Because you are all thinking about and talking about this important purpose that we have, which is to solve the problem of economic divergence through education, the most important rung on the ladder for economic mobility. So, now that we've talked about higher education ethos, what about the campus ethos? Now, here's something. I do track, right? I like to run track. And so I went to the U.S. Track and Field Championships down at Eugene with my wife. We had a good time. We're walking along, and we see this inscription off the administration building of a Research One university. Knowledge is the soul of a republic. Yeah? Do you really think that's true? Is there anything wrong with that? Anybody have an idea that might be awry? Well, guess what? I mean, John Jay, after all, he's one of the biggest slave owners and slave traders. Well, he's quoted here on the building. That's a problem. But the problem is it's not the soul. Because if it's the soul of the republic, ChatGPT is now the soul of our republic. Right? It's got all the knowledge. Hello. So, this is where I have to, remember I told you that my hero is Sextus Empiricus? Oh, another one of my great heroes is Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is the person who said knowledge is power. As Thomas Jefferson quoted Francis Bacon 4 times when he founded the University of Virginia, right? He's one of my heroes. I think he's Shakespeare. I asked ChatGPT if he was Shakespeare. ChatGPT doesn't think so, but there's a lot of people who think he might be. Because he said all these wonderful things in order to change the academy from what at the time was Aristotelian scholasticism, which you settled disputes by just pointing to authorities. And whoever could quote Pliny in the case of the natural sciences most effectively won the debate. He said, no, we have to read not from the book of man, but from the book of God, the book of nature. Isn't that beautiful and poetic? And he developed a scientific method, propounded that in the New Organon, and of course said knowledge is power. So but knowledge isn't power anymore. Purpose is power. It's a combination of purpose, skills, and money as to whether you deliver for society. And the reason knowledge isn't anymore the coin of the realm is it's changing too fast. Things are changing too quickly. What counts is learning. In our new learning age, at least as important as reverence for what you know is reverence for what you don't know. And I'm going to prove this to you. Because what you don't know is your infinite opportunity. Right? We need, at the campus, reverence, as much reverence for what you don't know as for what you do know. We need to quash the imposter syndrome. Now here's my question. Does anybody here have infinite knowledge? No. Me neither. Now, that's reserved for the deity. But there probably is infinite knowledge out there. So let's suppose that you're smarter than I am. There's a few PhDs in here. I only have a master's degree. So you have 15,000. The things that you know are countable, right? You have 15,000 of them, and I only have 10,000. So you have a higher degree, you see. You have a degree of knowledge, you see. You're better than I am. But guess what? We have the same opportunity, and this is called an isomorphism in mathematics. Okay, let's call your next thing that you don't know either. I don't know how to drive a helicopter. I tried to do it one time, and oh my God, they said, get out of the simulator. You keep crashing this thing. You're out of here. Maybe you know how to drive maybe you don't either, all right? If you don't know how to drive a helicopter, then we have that in common, except that's 15,001 in the ordinality of your unknown, and mine is 10,001. There's a one-to-one mapping, okay? All the way to infinity. Our infinities of unknown are equal between us as individuals. No matter what our color, our creed, our race, our ethnicity, they're equal. Our opportunity to attack that through the independent variables of academic and career success is the same. When a school and its students choose to identify, acknowledge, and honor what is unknown for each person, the following benefits follow. Because the body of what each of us doesn't know is always infinite and therefore equal between us, then the body of the unknown represents a marker of equal dignity between all people. Each person is encouraged towards self-respect. Their individualized unknown is their great opportunity. In a great school, the body of the unknown cannot be the basis for hiding, rejection, or personal shame. At a great institution of the future, it's celebrated. Let's find out what you don't know and I don't know, and what you know and I know. And let's see if we can trade, because we want to chew away at the infinite unknown. That's our opportunity. When a school reviews with respect what you as an individual don't know, that school is best prepared to help you develop the advanced skills of approaching and attacking your unknown, the peak performance variables. The other thing we're challenging is St. Augustine, back in 400 AD, he said that the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, he misspelled arithmetic, but that's okay. It was all in Latin, so no problem. But what happened in 1910, actually it was 1950, we ran the first transatlantic cable for telephonic communications. Up until that point, pretty much when we spoke to people, we did so. If we weren't giving speeches, we did so. We spoke to our family, we spoke to our local people, and so on. So speaking wasn't part of the 4 R's. But nowadays, we can talk to anybody. We talk to strangers all the time in this fast-changing world. And our ability to speak is very, very important. And so we're working with several CSU schools to help improve people's job prospects. After they go to the Career Center, right, they're ready to find a job, you want to interview, you want to prove how you come across. Now here's an interesting research from the UCLA. It turns out that which is the most important, how you come across? Your words, what I'm saying, my words? Is it my tone of voice? Or is it my facial expressions? Anybody want to venture a guess as to which is the most important? It's a quiet crowd. No, it's okay to make a mistake, no problem. Turns out the research shows that my facial expressions actually do the most communication. And so we've taken that and we've imbued this in what we call Standout. Standout.com, go to the website, $29 a month. You can practice how you come across. This is borrowed from the career centers. What we want to do with any institution that's up for it is arc this back to the very beginning of a student's career. A student's career, you need to speak as a freshman. You need to stop saying, like, I mean, duh. You have to stop doing that. You have to speak like you're authoritative, you're crisp, you're clear. Why not practice that early? And we want to arc that back with schools to the success centers. We also are challenging the admissions application. Now, interestingly, it wasn't just that CollegeNet solved the classroom scheduling. If you go to the U.S. Patent Office and you look at 1997, CollegeNet wrote the original patents for applying to college on the internet. And those patents are now expired, and now everything's all about the common application to run volume. But what we're going to do is we're going to challenge that structure. The idea of filling out a form, and then it's baked according to what your test scores are, we're calling that into question. We're actually going to, this fall, introduce the first focus ring, which is the world's first subjective supercomputer, which aggregates groups of people for a scholarship, and you get to see and evaluate the answers to the video script that have been given by 6 other contestants, and you're evaluated by 6 other contestants along qualitative subjective criteria, such as your authenticity, your credibility, whatever the organization desires to measure. Putting that out there, we're going to challenge admissions. And so you respond to the video set of questions, review your peers' video responses, and then you get to see these very interesting things called personality cube and perception cube. There's 2 dimensions here. One is my personality, which is what the impressions are that I make on other people, but another is my perception cube. You've heard about the implicit association test. Malcolm Gladwell in Oprah, he said, I flunked it even though I'm biracial. I flunked it because I guess I'm a racist, right? Well, you can see, is it true that Jim Wolfston evaluates women as more credible than men? I get to find that out about myself over time as I compete in these focus rings. Now, I'm going to close with this, and that is that we have an opening. We have a beautiful opening. This is also the 50th anniversary of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. He's the one who was responsible for the word paradigm shift, or the phrase paradigm shift. We have an opportunity, and what he said is science doesn't work by accretion. It doesn't work by piling on more and more knowledge like a bunch of ants. He said, no, it actually works because there's a crack in the model. Whatever the model happens to be, there's the exception cases. There's something that's wrong. And in those exception cases is the opportunity for transformation. There is a big, big problem in higher education, in the ethos, campus ethos, and the technology. We get to go through that opening together. I hope we can. Thank you very much.